Hello everyone, my name is Justin Newhall and I run JN Railroad Media here on YouTube. I was scouring YouTube for information on the Lima-Hamilton diesels a few months ago, and I found that this site is sorely lacking in good information on these first-generation veterans. Sure, there are a few videos talking about the history of the Lima Locomotive Works in general, but they only spend a minute or two talking about their diesel production. Most online opinions seem to be that they were Alco knockoffs and were somehow an inferior product. I believe that that is a gross misunderstanding of the product being sold. Now, I am very passionate about the Lima-Hamiltons as I volunteer here at the Whitewater Valley Railroad, where two of them are operating. So I thought I would fix this misunderstanding. In this three-part video series, I will examine the history of the Lima-Hamilton diesels, their intricacies and design quirks and features, and the ultimate fate of the last survivors of Lima's diesel production. So, come along with me as we explore the fascinating tale of Lima-Hamilton, the diesels that could have been.
This video is very kindly being sponsored by Retro Creations Photography. Retro Creations Photography was created by my good friend Keiwoon Krause and specializes in classic train photo charters and classic car photography. They specialize in scenes from the 1960s through the 1980s, which, in my opinion, is one of the least covered and most interesting time periods for photography. The work that Retro Creations does is excellent. In fact, they have an upcoming charter on January 25th on the Whitewater Valley Railroad, which I will be attending myself, and it sounds like there are plans for more of them in the future. They also usually host other photo charters at other locations each year. So make sure to keep an eye on their website for more details. To get tickets and check dates, go to www.retrocreationsphotography.squarespace.com. As an aside, many of the shots of the Limas you'll see in this video were actually done by Keiwoon. He's a truly talented photographer and a good friend. I really appreciate everything that he's doing and has done in the railroad community. Now, let's get back to those Lima-Hamiltons.
The Lima-Hamilton Corporation has a long and storied history, stretching all the way back to just after the American Civil War. The Lima Locomotive Works was founded in 1869 as Carnes, Harper and Company to produce stationary steam engines, threshing machines, steam traction engines, and, most crucially, sawmill equipment. In 1873, Ephraim Shea approached the company with a proposal to build a new type of logging engine that was gear-driven and well-suited to the rough conditions of working in the lumber industry. The locomotive became known as the Shea type and became a heavy hitter in the lumber, mining, and industrial locomotive markets. These Shea locomotives continued to be produced by Lima from the 1870s all the way up until 1945, making it one of the most successful and prolific geared steam locomotives ever produced. Shortly after starting production of these Shea-type locomotives, the company was incorporated and changed its name to the Lima Machine Works. As the steam locomotive market grew, the Lima Machine Works began producing conventional, rod-driven locomotives for the commercial market, culminating in Lima's superpower concept, introduced in the late 1920s. From that point until the end of steam locomotive production in Lima in 1949, the now newly renamed Lima Locomotive Works became well known as the, quote, Swiss watchmaker of railroad locomotives in the United States. If you wanted a high-quality and innovative steam locomotive, Lima was the go-to manufacturer. However, after World War II, the market for new steam locomotives began shrinking rapidly. Lima produced 205 steam locomotives for all markets in 1946, which rapidly dropped to 69 locomotives in 1947, 36 in 1948, and only 31 in 1949. The future of locomotive construction clearly was not in steam locomotives, and it was with great reluctance that Lima began looking to diesel locomotives as their locomotive of the future. For this, Lima would need diesel engines and electrical equipment, both of which the company completely lacked experience in designing and building. So they began looking for a partner. The General Machinery Corporation was formed in 1928 from the amalgamation of 5 smaller machinery companies located all over the eastern half of the United States. By the 1940s, General Machinery produced a wide variety of products, including ordnance during World War II, tools, cranes, construction machinery, and, most crucially for Lima, diesel engines. During the war, General Machinery produced half of the engines that powered the renowned Liberty ships. They even owned a set of shipyards that produced the ships directly. In 1936, General Machinery began providing diesel engines for railroad use to other manufacturers, and to railroads directly for re-engining old motor cars and small switcher locomotives. This became the Model 68SA diesel engine, and was capable of 400 horsepower at 900 RPM. It became known as a good and reliable diesel engine for rail, stationary, and construction uses. After the war, demand for new diesel engines for shipping began to fall, and General Machinery began looking for new markets for its diesel engines. It was at this time that General Machinery approached the Lima Locomotive Works with a proposal. The two companies could merge and start producing locomotives and other equipment. Both companies looked to benefit from the merger. Lima would get the diesel engine it needed to start production of diesel locomotives, and General Machinery would expand its production of Hamilton diesel engines into new markets. And so, on October 1st, 1947, the merger was consummated, and the two companies formed the new Lima-Hamilton Corporation. In the immediate term, the newly merged company began examining its options to decide on the best course for the future. Even at this very late date, there was still a significant portion of Lima management that wanted to continue to be committed to steam locomotives. With hindsight, this split seems completely nonsensical. Diesels were very clearly the way of the future, but at that time, you may have been forgiven for thinking otherwise. Mainstream diesel traction was barely a decade removed from the adoption on any kind of scale in passenger service, and only just getting its footing in the freight market. Steam was very much still king in 1947, and had been the tried and true motive power of choice for well over a century. Some still believed that this was only a passing fad, and that the diesel would fade into history. However, most in the industry agreed that by 1947, the diesel had proven that it was here to stay. This split in management got rather heated after the merger. Lima's chief mechanical engineer, Bert Townsend, supported further steam development. He believed that his 486 concept had a lot of merit, and that Lima should pursue the design. In fact, the design was sent as a proposal to several railroads, but no orders resulted from this brief campaign. It became clear to others in the company that steam was not the way forward. When it was inevitably announced that Lima-Hamilton would be terminating all steam production after 1949, Townsend was completely outraged. He ended up resigning in protest and went to work for another crane manufacturer, but died shortly after, in 1950, a broken man. It is interesting to note that both Lima and General Machinery were in excellent financial shape at the time of the merger, even despite the poor locomotive sales Lima was experiencing. Coming into the merger, Lima had no debt and maintained a spectacularly successful shovel and crane business. In 1947 alone, Lima shipped out 692 shovels and cranes, building almost two every single day. Business wasn't slowing down either. During the post-war boom, Lima was able to maintain a full 2 years' worth of orders for new construction equipment. General Machinery also entered the merger on good financial footing, flush with cash earned during World War II, and continuing its sales of engines. After the merger, the company found itself in a good position to recover its rightful place in the locomotive market by sustaining itself with the sales of shovels and cranes, as well as its significant sales of heavy presses and machine tooling. On October 16, 1947, only 15 days after the merger, Lima-Hamilton made its very first diesel sales. In fact, it made two, both to a company called the American Rolling Mill Company, or ARMCO, headquartered in Middletown, Ohio. ARMCO would eventually become one of Lima-Hamilton's best customers and would remain loyal to their products all the way up until the 1980s. There was only one problem. Lima-Hamilton only had a set of specs for these switcher locomotives. There was no working prototype or even sets of drawings or plans for these locomotives. This vote of confidence from ARMCO spoke volumes for the reputation both Lima and General Machinery held in the market, and interest for the new diesels seemed to be growing. The time had come for Lima-Hamilton to act. Plans began to be drafted, and a design began to take shape in the offices of the company in Lima, Ohio, for the frame, running gear, and production, and in Hamilton, Ohio, for the new prime mover. I'll go over the development of the prime mover in part 2, where I'll be examining the internal workings of a Lima-Hamilton diesel. The new locomotives began to quickly take shape on the Lima erecting floor. Some orders began to trickle in from Lima's most loyal former steam customers for new diesels, and things seemed to be progressing relatively smoothly. The erecting floor in Lima had been rearranged to allow for mass production of new locomotives, parts had been stocked up, and plenty of thought had been put into the production methods for these new locomotives. After 19 months of tireless work at Lima-Hamilton, the very first end cab switcher exited Lima-Hamilton's works on either May 12th or May 13th, 1949, as Lima-Hamilton demonstrator number 1000. The sources disagree on the precise date that this locomotive was completed. Number 1000 was a 1,000 horsepower model end cab switcher, much like ARMCO 709 behind me. Lima never designated model names for its diesel offerings, but this model became colloquially known as the LS1000. LS for Lima switcher, and 1000 for the 1,000 horsepower model rating. The LS1000 was 47 feet, 10 inches long from coupler to coupler, 14 feet 6 inches tall, and weighed in at about 120 tons. It carried a total of 625 gallons of fuel and was priced at $100,000 per unit. It rode on General Steel casting trucks and used Westinghouse motors, generators, and controls. This was more or less the same electrical gear being supplied to Fairbanks Morse switchers at that time. The trucks were a standard design that could be found on almost every model of diesel switcher being built at the time. Lima-Hamilton began touring around the country with number 1000 and began generating some interest in its new locomotives. Railroads were very impressed with the unit's pulling power and ease of maintenance. As a result, orders for new LS1000s began to trickle in from the Nickel Plate, B&O, Erie, New York Central, and Toledo, Peoria, and Western. The 1000 was eventually sold to the TP&W in December of 1949 after a successful sales campaign. Another order for very similar 750 horsepower units came from Cincinnati Union Terminal as passenger terminal switchers. These locomotives were essentially the same as the LS1000, except that they came with the 6-cylinder T69SA instead of the 8-cylinder. Whitewater Valley Railroad 25 is an example of this model and was the last one to be built to this specification. Cut would be the only purchaser of the LS 750, with 6 units produced in total. Late in 1949, Lima-Hamilton was approached by the Pennsylvania Railroad for an order of transfer locomotives. A transfer unit had been offered in the catalog since diesel production began, being originally offered as a 2,000 horsepower center cab design, utilizing 2 T89 SA engines. No sales were made, so Lima-Hamilton increased the offered horsepower to 2,200 and then 2,400, but still no sales were recorded. The Pennsylvania became interested in this model when Baldwin, who had been supplying a similar type of locomotive previously, couldn't deliver a higher horsepower version. The Pennsy wanted a 2,500 horsepower transfer locomotive to handle hump jobs and transfer runs between major yards on its vast system. LH agreed to the deal and upgraded its design to 2,500 horsepower. A total of 11 units were ordered on November 14, 1949. These would be Lima-Hamilton's largest diesels by far, weighing in at an impressive 365,530 pounds and having a 61-foot 3-inch wheelbase. These units would be shipped out from Lima between May and July 1950. At the time of their construction, these were the largest and most powerful road switchers in the world and were quite the accomplishment, considering how new Lima-Hamilton was to the diesel market. They worked well, and the Pennsy was quite happy with them, returning again at the end of 1950 for a repeat order of 11 more of these units. Some were delivered with a suite of options, including a train phone, hump controls, cab signals, and 2 even came with dynamic braking. Indeed, things seemed to be going very well for Lima-Hamilton. The beginning of 1950 had a total of 34 diesels and 4 rotary snowplows on order from the locomotive division of LH, and things in the shovel and crane division were still quite good. The company hoped that a continued sales campaign would bring an uptick of orders for the upcoming year. Even still, the company was forced to lay off some of the workforce, as orders were not sufficient to keep all the workers busy for the upcoming year. In early 1950, Lima-Hamilton had accumulated enough data on its new locomotives to evaluate their overall performance. For the most part, the few railroads that had purchased them thought fairly highly of them, and management determined that their overall design was sound. One of the few changes that Lima-Hamilton wanted to make was to further increase the horsepower rating of their new diesels to outcompete their competitors of the time. Most other builders were manufacturing 1,000 horsepower switching locomotives. However, with only some tweaking to the fuel system, Lima-Hamilton was able to increase the power output of their switchers all the way up to 1,200 horsepower. This new model became known as the LS 1200 within the railfan community, but was simply called the 1,200 horsepower diesel electric switcher by Lima-Hamilton. The conversion to this new higher horsepower model was so simple that several railroads operating LS 1000s soon upgraded their own locomotives to 1,200 horsepower. Baltimore and Ohio 320 is an example of this new model of switcher and was built in December of 1950. After careful consideration, specifications for 10 different models were planned. These were the 800 and 1,200 horsepower switchers, 800 and 1,200 horsepower road switchers, 1,600 and 2,400 horsepower transfer units, 1,600 and 2,400 horsepower center cab road switchers, which were to basically just be the same as the transfer center cabs, with the addition of a space for a steam generator, and then something of an oddity. The firm offered what they called double unit transfer locomotives, which seemed to just be pairs of their standard end cab switchers MU'd together to get the final horsepower rating. These were offered at 1,600 and 24 horsepower ratings. In practical terms, This choice seems to be redundant, as any unit offered could be equipped with MU equipment regardless. So this seems like a very odd choice. A variety of different options were offered for the road units, including steam heating equipment, dynamic brakes, and MU connections. The larger center cab units were also offered with a choice of either A1A swing bolster trucks, allowing for greater flexibility at the cost of one fewer motors, or CC rigid bolster trucks, sacrificing flexibility for the additional electric motor. Only 3 of the 10 models were actually ordered and delivered to railroads. These were the 800 and 1200 horsepower switchers and the 1200 horsepower road switcher. These models began selling, with orders for the 800 horsepower switcher coming in from the Rock Island and New York Central. Orders also came in for the 1200 horsepower switcher from Armco Steel, the B&O, New Haven, Nickel Plate, New York Central, and Terminal Railroad Association of St. Louis. The New York Central also put in an order for road switchers, requesting that they be equipped with steam generators, a single control stand to run long hood forward, and MU connections on the rear short hood side only, meaning they could only be operated together back to back. The Central intended these units to be used in commuter and branch line passenger service in the Northeast, with a total of 16 delivered. These would be the only Lima-Hamiltons to ever be equipped with steam heating equipment. Repeat orders for more transfer units rolled in from the Pennsylvania. Finally, 2 more 750 horsepower switchers were ordered by Cincinnati Union Terminal. The terminal decided to stick with the 750 horsepower unit because they offered space for the oversized air compressor that the 800 horsepower unit couldn't quite offer. Indeed, things seemed to be going very well for Lima-Hamilton, and it appeared that the builder was on the verge of breaking into the mainstream locomotive market in a big way. There was talk that LH was ready to challenge Baldwin for the 4th place spot, and maybe even go after Fairbanks Morse for number 3. However, this would never come to fruition when merger talks between Baldwin and Lima-Hamilton began. Talks moved very quickly, and on August 4th, 1950, the merger plans were announced. This would very unfortunately mean the end of locomotive production in Ohio. Merger talks had been ongoing in absolute secrecy for several months prior to their announcement to the board. It's unclear who approached who about the merger. Some speculate that Lima's CEO had begun talks on his own accord. Others think that Westinghouse, the electrical component supplier of both Baldwin and Lima-Hamilton, encouraged talks between the two companies to strengthen its own position as an electrical supplier. Whatever the case may be, the merger terms were put forward to the stockholders.
What's interesting to note is that Lima-Hamilton was actually in a fairly good financial situation once again. Baldwin, however, was in dire financial straits. The company had incurred a lot of debt from building their absolutely monstrous locomotive production facility in Eddystone, Pennsylvania, and the acquisition of several other companies in an attempt to diversify their portfolio. During the Great Depression, Baldwin declared bankruptcy and never really financially recovered after that. It was this financial uncertainty that pushed Baldwin towards looking for new acquisitions to both eliminate competition and expand its own product line. The problem for Baldwin was that they had limited funds to try to acquire other companies. When merger talks began with Lima-Hamilton, Baldwin apparently decided that this was an acquisition opportunity that it could ill afford to pass up. There were no other locomotive manufacturers that the firm could afford to purchase, and few other prospects for an expanded product line. Of particular interest to Baldwin was Lima-Hamilton's continuing success in the shovel and crane business, as well as its sales success with industrial presses and tooling. These showed a lot of potential to bring in additional revenue for Baldwin until they could figure out a better strategy for selling diesel locomotives. In the end, Baldwin agreed to acquire Lima-Hamilton stock. Stockholders would then receive new Baldwin Lima-Hamilton stock in a one-for-one trade. The official announcement of the deal was made on November 20th, and on November 30th, 1950, the Lima-Hamilton Corporation and the Baldwin Locomotive Works officially merged to become Baldwin Lima-Hamilton. First up on the list of priorities for the new BLH was to decide on a plan for the future. The company looked at both product lines from Baldwin and Lima-Hamilton, and a choice had to be made. Which product line do they keep in production? There were upsides and downsides for both lines. The Lima-Hamilton line seemed to be very promising. It was thought that there was potential for even more horsepower out of the T89 SA, especially if more cylinders could be added to make a V engine. They also seemed to be reliable in service up to that point. In addition, Lima-Hamilton diesel locomotives offered the highest tractive effort for a given horsepower rating on the market at the time. The downside for them was that they were basically unproven. At this point, Lima-Hamilton diesels had only been in full production for about a year, so it was not yet known if the locomotives would suffer from problems with wear over time, and their ease of maintenance had not yet been fully proven. The Baldwin line, on the other hand, had been in production for much longer. The 608 prime mover, Baldwin's equivalent to the T89 SA, had been installed in locomotives since 1946 and already was producing more horsepower than the T89 SA. As a development of the VO de la Verne engine, it had already been through the full development cycle, and its flaws were already well known and mostly fixed by 1950. It also had been much more widely produced, being installed in hundreds of locomotives of varying models. Baldwin's product line was also fully filled out by this time. Baldwin offered locomotives for virtually every market available in the United States. The downside was that Baldwin had developed a somewhat poor reputation for reliability with their VO line, which was going to be a very difficult problem to try and fix. In the end, they decided to stick with the former Baldwin line and discontinued the Lima-Hamilton line. Without the benefit of hindsight, this decision makes sense. Baldwin engineers were confident that they had fixed the reliability issues with the new 608 prime mover, and a production line was already working in the enormous Eddystone plant to mass produce this line of locomotives. Meanwhile, the potential problems with the T89 SA were still unknown and would only be discovered with a couple more years of service. When problems would eventually be discovered, it would take several more years to get them completely solved. This was time that the new BLH just didn't have if it wanted to remain relevant in the diesel market.
And so it was with great sadness that the very last Lima-Hamilton diesels rolled out of the shops. The last end cab switcher, Armco Steel E110, was delivered in August 1951, and the last transfer unit was delivered the following month, bringing an end to production of locomotives in Lima, Ohio, after 78 years.
The immediate plans for the Lima plant were pretty clear. The plant was to be converted to the production of construction equipment, which looked like BLH's best hope for the future if the locomotive division couldn't be turned around. This meant completing the rest of the locomotive production that was already on the books for the factory. As a result, no new orders for new locomotives would be accepted after the BLH merger in November of 1950, with one exception. Armco Steel was allowed to place one final order for two 1,200 horsepower units with the plant a few months after all other orders had been received. It's unclear why they were allowed to place this order, but it seems that this was done as a thank you to Armco, who had been one of Lima's best customers for diesels, while also helping use up the remaining parts that had been produced at the plant to round out production. As previously mentioned, these two locomotives, E109 and E110, were the last two end-cab switchers to leave the plant. Also completed in 1951 were a number of 800 and 1,200 horsepower units for roads like the Rock Island, New York Central, Armco, and the Baltimore and Ohio, There was also a repeat order for more center cab transfer locomotives from the Pennsy, and 2 more 750 horsepower switchers for Cincinnati Union Terminal, still equipped with the oversized air compressors. As production wound down, the workforce dwindled, and when locomotive production ceased, the Lima plant became the construction equipment division of BLH, bringing a complete end to the locomotive production in Lima, Ohio.
In total, 178 Lima-Hamilton diesels were produced between 1949 and 1951. They continued operating on various railroads throughout the Midwest for several decades. The Class 1s sold off their Limas to other companies by the 1960s, where many continued to soldier on. Interestingly, many of them ended up working in the steel industry. I would guess that they were cheap to buy secondhand, and steel mills liked their high tractive effort and horsepower ratings relative to their size, making them perfect for the daily grind of the steel mills. I will be covering the fates of these locomotives in part 3 of this series. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed, give me a subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Be on the lookout for parts 2 and 3 of this deep dive series. In part 2, I'll be covering the more in-depth mechanical and technical side of these locomotives. And in part 3, I'll be covering the fate of the Lima-Hamiltons and where they can be found today. I'd like to thank the Whitewater Valley Railroad for their help with this project. It would be completely impossible without their support. If you get a chance, you should come down and visit us. We're located right here in Connersville, Indiana, about an hour and a half northwest of Cincinnati and an hour and a half southeast of Indianapolis. We have 2 Lima-Hamiltons in operation and a 3rd on the property. Come check us out. We run weekend excursions between May and October. Thank you so much for watching, and take care.